You really think anyone in that building is going to take your word over mine? Marcus Walter Briggs smirked, smoothing down his mustard-yellow silk tie, the kind that cost more than most people's car payments. You're a kid from the West End sitting in a boardroom that was never built for you. I'm a third-generation Briggs. When the auditors find that dirty money sitting in your name, nobody is going to ask a second question. They already expect it to be you. Marcus Webb didn't blink. He let the silence stretch out like a wire pulled taut between them. And when he finally spoke, his voice was almost gentle. You're right, Walter. Marcus said. They expect it to be me. That's exactly what I'm counting on. The Atlanta skyline glittered like scattered glass against the deep purple of an early evening sky. 61 floors above Peachtree Street. Inside the polished glass tower that housed Cascade Freight Works. Walter Briggs was putting the finishing touches on the most elaborate lie of his career. Walter was the senior vice president of strategic operations, a man who had inherited his title the same way he'd inherited his trust fund, by simply being born into it. He looked at human beings the way other men looked at line items on a balance sheet, useful right up until they became inconvenient. And right now, Walter had a very expensive problem. $118 million had vanished from Cascade's offshore reserve accounts, funneled out through a maze of phantom shipping contracts to cover a mountain of gambling debt and a set of business arrangements he never should have made with a group of men known only as the Larkspur Organization. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network had started asking questions. A full federal audit was weeks away. Walter needed someone to bleed for his sins. And he needed that person to look guilty before anyone even opened a single file. Enter Marcus Webb. Marcus was the director of global distribution at Cascade Sharp. Deliberate. And maddeningly thorough. He had grown up in Atlanta's West End. In a small brick house, 2 blocks from a corner store that had been robbed 3 times before he turned 12. He'd earned his MBA from Ashworth University by working a graveyard shift through every single semester. And he had clawed his way into a corner office that men like Walter Briggs assumed he'd stumbled into by accident. He coached a youth basketball league on Saturday mornings. He mentored 2 boys from his old block who were thinking about dropping out of school. He was, in Walter's eyes, the perfect vessel to pour every one of his crimes into. It's elegant. Really, Walter murmured to himself one evening, swirling a snifter of aged cognac in his corner office, looking over a stack of forged documents spread across his glass desk like a winning hand of cards. For weeks, Walter and 2 compromised contacts in Cascade's IT department had been quietly rerouting the digital fingerprints of the stolen money straight through the IP address tied to Marcus's office terminal. They'd opened a string of shell companies registered in the British Virgin Islands, listing Marcus as the sole beneficial owner, using a forged signature and biometric data lifted from an old security badge scan. Walter's logic was built on something uglier than greed. It was built on a quiet, practiced contempt. He had calculated, correctly, that a jury, a newsroom, and a corporate board would all swallow the story of a black executive who got greedy without chewing twice, the hometown success story who couldn't outrun where he came from. It was, Walter thought, an irresistible headline. Down the hall, Marcus sat at his own desk, scrolling through freight manifests that didn't add up. For weeks, he had noticed cargo ships, logging port arrivals that contradicted their satellite tracking data. Tens of millions of dollars routed to holding companies that, according to every public record Marcus could find, simply did not exist. When he first raised the discrepancies with Walter, the senior VP had waved it off as a database error. Marcus wasn't convinced. He kept digging, quietly mirroring the company's encrypted shipping ledgers onto an external drive he kept locked in a safety deposit box across town. He knew he had stumbled onto something dangerous. He just didn't know yet how close the detonator was to his own front door. That Wednesday night, just past 1:40 p. Walter set his plan into motion. He picked up a prepaid phone and dialed a number he had memorized rather than saved, leaking a doctored financial dossier to a contact deep inside the district attorney's office. Assistant District Attorney Calvin Pruitt, a man famous for chasing fast convictions over careful ones. The dossier painted Marcus Webb as the architect of the largest embezzlement scheme in Cascade's 40-year history. Falsified emails, fabricated wire transfers, a fake paper trail tying Marcus to organized crime. As Marcus packed up his briefcase that night, completely unaware of the digital guillotine hanging over him, Walter watched his reflection in the dark window glass and picked up his phone again, dialing a second number. "It's done," Walter said, his voice low and pleased with itself. "The file's already with the DA's office. They're moving on his house Sunday morning. Early. Make sure the rest of the evidence is sitting in his study before they kick the door in." "Understood, Mr. Briggs," a gruff voice answered. Walter hung up and allowed himself a long, satisfied smile. He had built an airtight cage around Marcus Webb. And Marcus, in his mind, was nothing but a pawn who hadn't even noticed the board had been rigged. Walter believed he was playing chess. What he had actually walked into was a snare, and he had just stepped into the very center of it with both feet. Sunday morning arrived with the sound of splintering wood. It was 4:05 a.m. in the quiet, tree-lined suburb of Sandy Springs. Marcus Webb was in his kitchen pouring his first cup of coffee when his front door was blown off its hinges by a battering ram. The stillness of the early morning shattered into chaos as a tactical team flooded his hallway. Red laser sights slicing through the dark. "Police, get on the ground, face down. Now." Boots pounded across hardwood floors. Marcus barely had time to register what was happening before a hand seized his shoulder and slammed him down onto the kitchen tile. His wife, Naomi, screamed from the top of the stairs as two officers rushed up toward her with weapons drawn. "I'm on the ground, I'm not resisting," Marcus shouted. His cheek pressed against the cold floor as handcuffs bit into his wrists. Within minutes his home had become a crime scene. Officers from the Atlanta Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, alongside investigators from the DA's office, tore through every room. Books swept off shelves, cushions slashed open, hard drives ripped out of his home office computer. Detective Raymond Holloway, a cop with 20 hard years on the force and a permanent sneer, walked into the kitchen and looked down at Marcus with open disgust. "Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for grand larceny, embezzlement, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. I'd strongly suggest using it, because you're looking at 15 to 30. Easy." "On whose authority?" Marcus asked, his voice level, despite the adrenaline tearing through him. "I haven't taken a dime from this company. Save it for the judge." Holloway scoffed. 2 hours later, news vans had already swarmed the cul-de-sac. As Marcus was marched out his front door, head pushed low, camera flashes erupted like a localized thunderstorm. The chyron scrolling across morning broadcasts read, "Cascade executive arrested in $118 million embezzlement scandal." Walter Briggs watched the live coverage from his projector screen at home, stretched a full 120 inches across his living room wall, and took a slow sip of his cognac. Everything was unfolding exactly as he had scripted it. The media was already convicting Marcus in the court of public opinion, running old footage of him walking into the office, cut against the flashing lights of squad cars. But the real performance was happening back at the house. While the raid was in full swing, a dirty cop on Walter's payroll slipped, unnoticed, into Marcus's home study. He pulled a small black ledger and a prepaid phone from his vest, sliding them deep into the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet. 8 minutes later, another investigator discovered them. "Got something in here," the investigator called out, holding up the ledger. The pages contained handwritten codes and account numbers matching the stolen Cascade funds. The phone was loaded with fabricated text threads about money drops and wire transfers. Every message apparently sent by Marcus. It was the final, undeniable piece that would turn a thin, circumstantial case into a guaranteed conviction. Marcus was loaded into the back of an armored transport van. As the doors slammed shut, swallowing him in darkness, the mask of panic he'd worn for the cameras began to dissolve. The frightened executive disappeared, replaced by a man radiating something far colder control. He leaned back against the steel bench, closed his eyes, and let out a slow, even breath. He had let them tear his house apart. He had let them terrify his wife. He had let his name get dragged across every screen in the city. It had cost him more than he ever wanted to admit. But as the van rolled toward the county detention center, Marcus knew something that Walter Briggs, the DA's office, and a corrupt detective did not. He knew that Black Ledger and that prepaid phone were about to be logged into an evidence room where every camera had been quietly swapped out 5 days earlier. He knew that every officer involved in that raid was already being tracked because Marcus Webb wasn't just a corporate director. For the past 9 months, he had been a sworn confidential informant for the FBI's Public Corruption Division. And the trap was already set. The interrogation room reeked of stale coffee and floor cleaner. For nearly 4 hours, ADA Calvin Pruitt and Detective Holloway had been hammering Marcus, slapping forged documents and photographs of the planted ledger onto the steel table between them. "It's over, Webb," Pruitt said, leaning in close. "We've got the offshore accounts. We've got the burner phone. We've got a mountain of digital evidence tying your terminal to every missing dollar. Your boss is fully cooperating. He's heartbroken over your betrayal. By the way, give us the people you were laundering for. Plead it out. And maybe I tell the judge to let you see daylight before you're 70. Marcus looked over the forged documents laid out in front of him. The forgery was good, frighteningly good. If he hadn't known better, he might have started doubting himself. "I want my lawyer," Marcus said evenly. Pruitt laughed. "Your lawyer's going to tell you to take the deal. You're finished." 10 minutes later, the heavy door swung open. A tall man in a dark slate suit walked in carrying a leather case, radiating an authority that had nothing to do with a public defender's badge. "I'm Diane Okafor's associate counsel," he said, voice flat and commanding. "I'm here representing Mr. Webb. Gentlemen, this interview is concluded. Clear the room." Pruitt scoffed. "You get 5 minutes before we formally book him." The man reached into his jacket and flipped open a slim leather badge holder, revealing a gold shield. "Special Agent Theo Marsh, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Public Corruption Division, out of the Ashgrove Federal Building. This is a federal hold now. Clear the room before I arrest you both for obstructing a federal investigation." The color drained from Pruitt's face. Holloway took a step back without a word. Both men shuffled out. The door slamming behind them, Agent Marsh locked it, glanced at the two-way mirror to confirm it was dead, and ran a small electronic sweeper across the table and walls. Once the light blinked green, his shoulders dropped a fraction. "You holding up?" he asked, crossing to unlock Marcus's cuffs. "They tore my house apart. Phil." They terrified Naomi. Marcus rubbed his wrists, his eyes hard and tired all at once. "Tell me this wasn't for nothing." Marsh pulled a thick dossier from his case. The seal of the Department of Justice stamped across the front Operation Quiet Anchor. "We have everything," Marsh said. "Briggs took the bait completely. When you brought us those mirrored ledgers 9 months ago, we knew he was moving money for the Larkspur organization. What we didn't have was proof he was doing it on purpose. Not just negligently. We needed him to commit a crime in real time. On the record. And framing me was that crime." Marcus said grimly. "Exactly. The dirty cop who planted that ledger, we caught all of it on hidden camera, installed in your hallway smoke detector last week. The burner phone, Briggs bought it himself, at an electronics kiosk downtown. Cash in hand. On camera. Receipt, and all. We've had a wiretap on the man for weeks. So we move now. Marcus said, "No." Marsh said, his eyes turning cold. "If we move now." His lawyers spin it as rogue cops acting alone. They drag it out for years, and he slips through. We want him to commit perjury under oath. On the record. In front of a jury. We want to take down the cops and the prosecutor who rushed this case through, just to put another black man away. We let the trial happen. We let Briggs testify. Once he raises his hand and lies to a judge. We close every door in that courtroom. Marcus felt a current of adrenaline run through him. It was a brutal gamble if the timing slipped even slightly. He could go to prison for a crime he never committed. Let's give him a show. Marcus said finally. Let him dig his own grave. I'll hand him the shovel. 5 months later. The Fulton Point Criminal Courts building was a circus. The story had consumed local news for weeks. A rising black executive accused of looting a Fortune 500 logistics company for over $100 million. Inside courtroom, 217. The air was thick with anticipation. Judge, Adriana Castillo. A jurist with a reputation for zero patience and zero theatrics. Presided from the bench. At the prosecution table, ADA Calvin Pruitt sat with the posture of a man who believed this case would launch his political career. At the defense table sat Marcus Webb, dressed in a deep burgundy suit, his expression unreadable. Beside him sat Diane Okafor, an elite federal defense attorney brought in by the Bureau specifically to play the part of his private counsel to everyone watching. The defense looked beaten before it started. They had called 0 witnesses in their case in chief and offered only the mildest objections as the prosecution paraded its evidence. In the front row sat Walter Briggs, dressed like a man in mourning, his eyes flickering with something close to delight every time they landed on Marcus. The prosecution calls Walter Briggs to the stand. Pruitt announced, and a murmur swept the gallery. Walter Rose buttoned his jacket and strode confidently to the witness box, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Perjury. Marcus thought, watching him sit. Strike 1. Mr. Briggs. Pruitt began. Describe your relationship with the defendant. It was built on trust. Walter said, his voice dripping with manufactured grief. I mentored Marcus. I championed his promotions. To learn he was using Cascade's systems to steal $118 million, it broke my heart. Government Exhibit 14. Pruitt continued, gesturing to the black ledger projected on the courtroom screen. Can you identify this handwriting? Walter put on his reading glasses and studied it solemnly. That is, without question, Marcus's handwriting. He used those codes to mask the shipments. I personally reviewed the IP logs from his terminal. The transfers happened while he was alone in his office, logged in under his own credentials. For nearly 2 hours, Walter Briggs constructed a masterful web of lies. He authenticated forged documents. He described conversations that had never taken place. He painted Marcus as a desperate man who had let greed pull him in over his head with dangerous people. Thank you, Mr. Briggs, Pruitt said, turning toward the defense table with a satisfied smile. Your witness. Walter settled back into his chair and looked directly at Marcus, offering the faintest, most arrogant tilt of his head. I win. The look said. Diane Okafor rose slowly. She carried no legal pad, no binder, just her own quiet certainty. She crossed to the center of the courtroom, heels clicking against polished marble. Mr. Briggs, she began, her voice soft but carrying. You testified that you personally reviewed the IP logs from Mr. Webb's office terminal. Is that correct? That's correct. And you testified that the handwriting in that ledger belongs to Mr. Webb, without a doubt. Okafor allowed herself a small smile, not a friendly one. Mr. Briggs, are you familiar with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network? Walter's eye twitched. I'm aware of the agency. Standard corporate knowledge. Are you also aware? Okafor said, her voice rising slightly, that it is a federal crime to knowingly submit forged evidence to a court, to conspire, to frame a private citizen, and to launder $118 million on behalf of an organized crime network. Objection. Pruitt, shot to his feet. Counsel is testifying. Your Honor, this is theater. Overruled. Judge Castillo said sharply, leaning forward. I'll allow it. Tread carefully. Counselor. Okafor turned back to the witness box. Mr. Briggs, would it surprise you to learn that Mr. Webb's office terminal has not been used to transfer a single file in over 9 months, because for the past 9 months, it has been entirely mirrored and monitored by the FBI's cyber division. The courtroom went still. The air seemed to leave the room all at once. Walter's confident expression cracked, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. At the prosecution table, Pruitt froze in confused silence. Okafor didn't let him recover. Your Honor, she announced, her voice ringing through the room. At this time, the defense calls its first rebuttal witness, Special Agent Theo Marsh of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Agent Marsh, flanked by 4 federal marshals and 2 forensic accountants, walked down the center aisle. The gallery erupted in whispers. Reporters stood up. Pruitt looked physically ill. Walter Briggs gripped the edge of the witness box, his knuckles white, staring across the room at Marcus, who, for the first time all trial, stared back without looking away. Marsh took the stand and presented his credentials to a stunned jury. Agent Marsh, Okafor said, describe your relationship with the defendant. Marcus Webb is a sworn confidential informant for the FBI. Marsh said clearly, 9 months ago, he came to our field office with evidence of large-scale embezzlement at Cascade Freight Works, acting under our direct supervision. Mr. Webb allowed himself to become the target of a framing conspiracy orchestrated by the man currently seated at the defense at the prosecution table, Walter Briggs. Objection. This is fabricated, Pruitt shouted. Sit down. Mr. Pruitt. Judge Castillo snapped, gavel cracking the bench. I want to hear every word of this. Proceed. Agent Marsh. Okafor turned on the courtroom projector. Instead of the prosecution's forged exhibits, a high-definition video filled the screen, a feed from a hidden camera mounted in a hallway smoke detector. It showed Detective Raymond Holloway slipping into Marcus's study, pulling the black ledger from his vest and tucking it into a filing cabinet. The timestamp showed it happened 8 minutes before the official search team found it. Several jurors gasped, hands flying to their mouths. What are we watching? Agent Marsh, Okafor asked. You're watching a Atlanta police detective, currently on Walter Briggs's payroll, planting fabricated evidence inside our informant's home. And the phone. The screen switched to surveillance footage from an electronics kiosk. It clearly showed Walter Briggs handing a clerk a thick stack of cash in exchange for the exact model of prepaid phone later entered into evidence. The serial number on that purchase matches the device recovered from Mr. Gree. Webb's filing cabinet. Marsh confirmed. Walter was visibly shaking now, sweat soaking through his collar, eyes darting toward the exits only to find federal marshals already stationed at every door. One last thing. Agent Marsh, Okafor said, holding up a small drive. Tell the court about the $118 million. We traced the actual origin of every transfer, Marsh said, turning to the jury. The logs were spoofed to appear as if they came from Mr. Webb's terminal. Our cyber team traced the real signal back to an encrypted laptop inside Walter Briggs's penthouse. We also obtained a court-authorized wiretap on Mr. Briggs's phone. Okafor clicked her remote. Walter's own voice filled the courtroom, recorded the night before Marcus's arrest. Calm and self-satisfied. It's done. The file's already with the DA's office. They're moving Sunday morning. Early. Make sure the rest sits in his study before they kick the door in. It's perfect. They'll see a black man with sudden money and stop asking questions. He takes the fall for all of it. The recording clicked off. What followed wasn't silence. It was something closer to shock. The jury stared at Walter Briggs with open revulsion. Every layer of contempt, calculation, and cruelty in his plan was now laid bare in front of the entire room. Your Honor, Okafor said, turning to the bench. The defense moves for immediate dismissal of all charges against Marcus Webb. With prejudice, we further request the court detain the witness, Walter Briggs, for federal authorities. Judge Castillo looked at Walter with naked fury. Mr. Briggs, you have made an absolute mockery of this courtroom. You weaponized the justice system to destroy an innocent man's life. She brought the gavel down hard. Case dismissed. All charges against Mr. Webber dropped, before the gallery could even react. Agent Marsh stood, pulled a set of cuffs from his belt, and walked straight toward the witness box. Walter Briggs, Marsh said, his voice cutting through the rising noise. You are under arrest by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for perjury, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, wire fraud, and racketeering. Hands behind your back. This is insane. Walter stammered, stumbling backward, his legs nearly giving out. Do you know who my family is? I don't care if your family owns the building, Marsh said, spinning him around and pressing him against the wooden railing. The click of the cuffs locking shut sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. Ada Pruitt slumped in his chair, head in his hands, already calculating how fast his own indictment would arrive. Detective Holloway, watching from the back, tried to bolt for the exit. Two marshals tackled him to the marble floor before he made it 3 steps. The courtroom dissolved into chaos. Reporters scrambled over each other toward the doors, desperate to break the story that the prosecution's star witness, the grieving victim, had just been arrested on the stand as the actual mastermind. Marcus Webb stayed seated. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply exhaled, long and slow, feeling months of pressure finally lift off his chest, the sleepless nights, the fear in Naomi's eyes, the headlines that had tried to bury him. You did it, Okafor said quietly, resting a hand on his shoulder. You held the line. Marcus stood, buttoning his jacket, and stepped directly into Walter's path as Agent Marsh dragged him toward a side exit. Walter's suit was wrinkled now, his composure gone, replaced by a man staring down decades behind bars. You set me up, Walter hissed, his eyes wet with humiliation. You ruined my life. Marcus looked down at him, his expression unyielding. No, Walter, I just gave you the rope. You tied the knot and jumped all on your own. You thought I was disposable. You thought my skin made me the easiest target in the building. You were wrong about all of it. He leaned in, voice dropping low. Enjoy federal prison. I hear they don't care much about legacy in there. Marsh pulled Walter forward, hauling him out through the same hallway cameras that had once broadcast Marcus's arrest to the world, now broadcasting Walter's within 72 hours. The consequences landed with brutal speed. Cascade Freightworks board fired Walter Briggs immediately, stripping every stock option and pension he had. Federal agents seized his penthouse, his properties, and his offshore accounts under the RICO statute. His wife filed for divorce before the ink on the indictment had even dried. And the Larkspur organization, furious that Walter had exposed their laundering pipeline, placed a bounty on him that forced the Bureau of Prisons into permanent protective isolation. Marcus Webb walked out of the Ash Grove Federal Building 2 days later, with his arm around Naomi. Sunlight cutting clean across the Atlanta skyline. Cascade's board, scrambling to salvage what remained of their reputation, offered Marcus the role of CEO, along with a substantial settlement for what he'd endured. He accepted. He took the corner office that had once belonged to Walter Briggs, but he didn't pour himself a drink to celebrate. He immediately overhauled the company's compliance structure and funded a new scholarship program for kids from the West End. The same streets he'd grown up on. They had tried to bury the wrong man. They didn't realize that underneath all that dirt, he was a seed, and he grew into something they never saw coming. What an unbelievable turn of events. Walter Briggs thought he was playing chess. He never realized Marcus Webb had wired the whole board to blow. That's the purest form of hard karma. There is watching a corrupt system try to crush an innocent man, only to watch the trap snap shut on the real villain. Right there in open court. Justice wasn't just served. It walked in wearing a federal badge and slammed the door behind it.